Milliómos volt, de az igazi örökség a titok volt, amit őrzött. Csak egy munkát akart, de valami nagyobbra választották ki. És amikor azt suttogta, betehetek mindent, tudta, hogy nincs visszaút. Ha szereted a szerelmes és romantikus történeteket, nézd végig, iratkozz fel a csatornára, és írd meg kommentben, honnan hallgatsz minket.
Some houses are built not just with stone and timber, but with silence, secrets and promises never broken. Lancaster Manor, hidden among mist-shrouded hills and woods of twisted trees in the heart of the Yorkshire Dales, is one of those. Proud, impenetrable, with halls where footsteps echo louder than they should and mirrors that seem to watch back. There time moves differently, and feelings don't follow the same rules as the outside world. Amelia Rivers felt the weight of the house before she even crossed its threshold. It was late October, the kind of grey afternoon that seems to exist only in northern England, where the sky presses down like a heavy blanket and the air tastes of rain that hasn't yet decided to fall. The taxi that brought her from the village had already disappeared down the winding drive, swallowed by the fog that clung to the ancient oaks lining the road. She stood there, 22 years old, a single worn suitcase at her feet, staring up at the manor that would become her home, her prison, or perhaps something she didn't yet have words for. The building rose before her like something from a Gothic novel, all grey stone and leaded windows that reflected nothing but the colourless sky. Ivy crawled up the eastern wall, bare of leaves this time of year, looking less like decoration and more like veins spreading across pale skin. Gargoyles crouched at the corners of the roof, their stone faces eroded by centuries of Yorkshire weather into expressions that might have been agony or ecstasy. It was impossible to tell. Amelia picked up her suitcase, its handle wrapped in duct tape that had long since lost its stickiness, and climbed the steps to the massive oak door. Before she could knock, it opened, as if the house itself had been watching, waiting for the precise moment of her arrival. An older woman stood in the doorway, her grey hair pulled back so severely it seemed to stretch her skin. She wore a black dress that fell to mid-calf and sensible shoes that made no sound on the marble floor. Her eyes were the colour of winter fog. "Miss Rivers," the woman said. "It wasn't a question. I'm Mrs. Cavendish, the head of staff. You're late." Amelia glanced at her phone. She was 3 minutes early. But she said nothing, only nodded and stepped inside. The entrance hall was vast, the kind of space designed to make visitors feel small. A chandelier hung from the ceiling 3 stories above, its crystals dim with dust. The floor was a checkerboard of black and white marble, worn smooth by generations of Lancaster feet. Portraits lined the walls, men and women in period dress staring down with expressions ranging from stern to contemptuous. None of them smiled. "Your room is in the east wing, 3rd floor," Mrs. Cavendish said, already moving toward the grand staircase that curved upward into shadow. "You'll share a bathroom with Sarah, the other housemaid. Breakfast is at 6, whether you're hungry or not. Mr. Lancaster doesn't tolerate lateness, disorder, or questions. You'll clean what you're told to clean, touch nothing else, and speak only when spoken to. Is that clear?" "Yes, ma'am." Mrs. Cavendish paused, one hand on the banister, and looked back at Amelia with something that might have been pity or might have been warning. "And Miss Rivers? Stay away from the west wing always, no matter what you hear." They climbed the stairs in silence. Amelia's suitcase bumped against her leg with each step, a rhythm that sounded too loud in the stillness. The house smelled of beeswax and something else, something underneath that was harder to name. Old books, perhaps, or old sorrows. Her room was small but clean, with a narrow bed, a wardrobe that listed slightly to the left, and a window that looked out over the gardens. In the failing light, she could just make out the shapes of topiaries cut into forms she couldn't quite identify, and beyond them, a hedge maze that seemed to go on forever. Mrs. Cavendish left her with a stack of uniforms, all black with white aprons, all in exactly her size, though she'd never sent her measurements. Amelia sat on the edge of the bed and listened to the house settle around her. It creaked and groaned like a living thing, and in the distance she could hear what sounded like music, just a few notes from a piano and then silence again. She thought of her mother, the one she'd never known, who had worked in this house decades ago and then vanished without a trace. No goodbye, no explanation, just gone as if she'd never existed at all. The relatives who'd raised Amelia in that forgotten village near the Scottish border had told her little, only that her mother had gone to work at Lancaster Manor and never came back. When Amelia had turned 18 and found the advertisement for a housemaid position at the same manor, something in her chest had tightened like a fist. She'd applied without thinking, driven by a need she couldn't name, to understand, to find something, to begin a story that had never properly started. But now, sitting in this cold little room with darkness gathering outside and the house breathing around her, she wondered if she'd made a terrible mistake. She didn't meet Adrian Lancaster that first day or the second. She cleaned guest rooms that clearly hadn't been used in years, dusted furniture beneath white sheets, and polished silver that would never see a dinner table. The other staff members, few as they were, kept their distance. Sarah, the other housemaid, was a mousy girl of 19, who spoke in whispers and flinched at sudden movements. There was Thomas, the groundskeeper, who was at least 70 and spent most of his time in the gardens, talking to the topiaries, and Mrs. Cavendish, who moved through the house like a silent ghost, appearing in doorways when you least expected it. On the third day, Amelia saw him. She was cleaning the library, a vast room with floor-to-ceiling shelves that held books in languages she didn't recognize. The ladder that ran along the shelves on a brass rail needed oiling. It screeched when she moved it. She was dusting the upper shelves, balanced precariously on a rung that wobbled when she felt it. The sensation of being watched. The same prickling awareness that animals must feel when a predator is near. She turned, and there he was. Adrian Lancaster stood in the doorway, one hand resting on the frame, and Amelia forgot how to breathe. He was tall, perhaps 6'2", with the kind of lean, rangy build that spoke of discipline rather than vanity. His hair was dark, shot through with grey at the temples, and fell just past his collar in a way that suggested he didn't care about current fashion. He wore black trousers and a white shirt, with the sleeves rolled to his elbows, revealing forearms corded with muscle and scattered with scars she couldn't identify. But it was his face that held her. Angular, all sharp cheekbones and a jaw that looked carved from marble, eyes so dark they were almost black, set beneath heavy brows, a mouth that seemed designed for cruelty, but somehow suggested something else. Pain, perhaps, or longing. He was 46, she knew from the research she'd done before coming. He looked ageless, ancient and newborn all at once. "You're the new girl," he said. His voice was low, rough, like gravel wrapped in silk. "Yes, sir." "Amelia Rivers." He moved into the room and she was suddenly aware of how far she was from the door, how alone they were. He walked with the kind of deliberate grace that predators have, each movement economical, purposeful. He stopped a few feet from the ladder and looked up at her. "You're reading," he said. It wasn't an accusation, just an observation. Amelia's face flushed. She'd been caught. In her hand was a slim volume of poetry she'd pulled from the shelf, Sylvia Plath, pages so worn they felt like fabric. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have—" "What do you think of it?" She blinked. "Sir, the poem. What do you think?" She looked down at the open page. I think she's writing about drowning. But not in water, in herself." Something shifted in his expression, so subtle she almost missed it. A softening around the eyes, perhaps. Or maybe she'd imagined it. "Keep it," he said. "If you like." "I couldn't. I insist." He turned to leave, then paused. "My wife used to read in the library." In secret, she thought. "But I always knew." He didn't look back at her when he said it. "Don't let Mrs. Cavendish catch you. She doesn't approve of staff educating themselves above their station." And then he was gone, leaving only the faint scent of expensive cologne and old books in his wake. Amelia climbed down from the ladder on shaking legs. Her heart was hammering so hard, she thought it might crack her ribs. She looked at the book in her hand, then slipped it into the pocket of her apron. That night, alone in her narrow bed, she read it cover to cover by the light of her phone. Every poem felt like a message meant specifically for her. Every word seemed to pulse with a meaning just beyond her grasp. The days began to follow a pattern. She woke before dawn, dressed in the dark, and went down to the kitchen where Mrs. Cavendish had already laid out her tasks for the day. She cleaned and dusted and polished, and tried not to think about the West Wing, which remained locked and forbidden. She ate her meals in silence with Sarah, who never raised her eyes from her plate. And sometimes, when she was working alone in one of the rooms, she would feel it again. That sense of being watched. She would turn, and there would be Adrian Lancaster, Standing in a doorway or sitting in a chair she could have sworn was empty a moment before, just watching her with those dark, unreadable eyes. He never spoke to her during these moments. He would simply watch for a few minutes, then leave as silently as he'd come. It should have frightened her. Instead, it made her skin feel too tight, her blood run too hot. She found herself wondering what he saw when he looked at her. Did he see a girl trying to understand where she came from? Did he see someone replaceable? Just another in a long line of young women who'd passed through these halls? Or did he see something else entirely? At night, she began to explore the house. It was foolish, she knew, but she couldn't help herself. She would wait until she heard Mrs. Cavendish's door close at the end of the hall, then slip out in her nightgown and bare feet, moving through the corridors like a ghost. The house revealed itself to her slowly. She found rooms full of furniture covered in white sheets, like bodies waiting to be identified. She found a conservatory where plants grew wild, untended for years, their leaves pressed against the glass as if trying to escape. She found a music room with a piano in the center, its lid closed and locked with a small brass padlock. Dust covered every surface except the lock, which gleamed as if someone polished it regularly. And she found the portraits, dozens of them, in a gallery on the second floor. Lancasters going back generations, all with those same dark eyes, that same severe beauty. But what drew her attention were the women. Not the Lancaster women, who were few and all looked vaguely miserable, but the others. The ones in the smaller frames, tucked in corners or hung in the darker parts of the gallery. Young women, pretty in an unremarkable way, dressed in the clothing of servants or lower-class girls. Each portrait had a small brass plaque beneath it, with a name and dates. And Amelia noticed something that made her blood run cold. They all had died young. None had lived past 30. And each had been in service at Lancaster Manor. She was staring at one portrait in particular, a girl with dark hair and eyes that seemed too large for her face, when she heard footsteps behind her. She spun around, her heart in her throat. Adrian stood there wearing nothing but dark pajama bottoms, his chest bare. In the dim light from the sconces on the wall, she could see more scars, a whole map of them across his torso. Some looked surgical, others looked like something else entirely. "You should be asleep," he said. "I couldn't sleep." Her voice came out as a whisper. He moved closer, and she forced herself not to step back. He smelled of whiskey and something else, something warm and masculine that made her head swim. He looked at the portrait she'd been studying. "Her name was Catherine," he said. "She worked here in 1952. She fell from the North Tower. They said it was an accident." Was it? He looked at her then, really looked at her, and she felt something crack open inside her chest. "Does it matter? She's dead either way. Why do you keep them?" "The portraits. To remember." He reached past her, his arm brushing against hers, and straightened the frame. The contact lasted less than a second, but it felt like being burned. "My family has a long memory, Miss Rivers. We don't forget the people who've passed through these halls, even the ones we should. What happened to your wife?" The question came out before she could stop it. His expression went blank, like a door slamming shut. "Go back to your room." "I'm sorry, I didn't mean now." She fled, back through the corridors, up the stairs to the third floor, into her little room where she locked the door and pressed her back against it, breathing hard. Her whole body was shaking, not from fear, though there was that too. From something else, something that felt like standing at the edge of a cliff and wanting to jump. The next morning, she found something on her pillow, a necklace, delicate and clearly expensive, a silver chain with a small pendant in the shape of a bird. There was no note, no explanation, but she knew who had left it. Her fingers trembled as she picked it up. The bird was exquisitely detailed, every feather visible, its beak open as if caught mid-song. Or mid-scream. She should have refused it, should have returned it to him with thanks but no thanks, should have maintained the distance that was appropriate between a man like him and a girl like her. Instead, she put it on. And when she looked at herself in the small mirror above her wash basin, she barely recognized the girl staring back. There was something in her eyes that hadn't been there before, something hungry. That afternoon, as she was cleaning the drawing room, Mrs. Cavendish appeared in the doorway with an expression Amelia couldn't read. "Mr. Lancaster requests your presence at lunch," she said. "In the small dining room. 1 o'clock. Don't be late." Amelia's hand stilled on the silver candlestick she'd been polishing. "Why?" Mrs. Cavendish's mouth thinned. "It's not our place to ask why, Miss Rivers. Only to obey." At precisely 1 o'clock, Amelia stood outside the small dining room in her cleanest uniform, the necklace hidden beneath her collar. Her palms were sweating. She knocked. "Come in." The room was smaller than she'd expected, with wood-panelled walls and a table set for two. Adrian sat at the head, dressed in a charcoal suit that made his eyes look even darker. He gestured to the chair to his right. "Sit." She sat. A place setting had been laid out for her. Fine china and crystal that probably cost more than everything she owned. A woman she didn't recognize, older and silent, brought in the first course. Soup, something creamy and fragrant that Amelia's stomach was too knotted to appreciate. "You found the necklace," Adrian said, watching her over the rim of his wineglass. "Yes, thank you. It's beautiful, but I can't accept. It belonged to my grandmother. She had excellent taste." He set down his glass. "You're wearing it." It wasn't a question, but she nodded anyway. "Good." They ate in silence for a while, the only sound the clink of silverware against china. Amelia was acutely aware of every movement she made, every breath she took. She felt like she was being studied, catalogued, assessed for some purpose she couldn't fathom. "Tell me about your mother," Adrian said suddenly. Amelia's spoon stilled halfway to her mouth. "What? Your mother? She worked here, didn't she? In the 80s. How did he know that? She'd never told anyone here about her mother. "Yes, but I never knew her. She left when I was a baby." "She didn't leave," his voice was flat, matter-of-fact. "She disappeared." "There's a difference." Amelia's blood ran cold. "What do you know about it?" He leaned back in his chair, studying her with those unreadable eyes. "More than you, I suspect. Less than I'd like." He paused. "Did you come here looking for answers, Amelia? About what happened to her?" Hearing her first name in his mouth felt obscenely intimate. She set down her spoon, her appetite gone. "I don't know why I came here. Maybe I thought I'd feel closer to her. Or maybe I'm just foolish." "You're not foolish." He said it with such certainty that she almost believed him. "You're brave. Or reckless. I haven't decided which. What's the difference?" A ghost of a smile touched his lips. It transformed his face, made him look younger, almost vulnerable. "Intent. Brave people know the danger and choose it anyway. Reckless people don't care about the danger at all. Which one are you?" The smile faded. "Neither. I'm the danger." The rest of the meal passed in a blur. Adrian asked her questions, ordinary ones about her life before Lancaster Manor, her education, her hopes. She answered mechanically, all the while feeling like there was another conversation happening beneath the words. A dialogue of looks and pauses and things left unsaid. When it was over and she stood to leave, he caught her wrist. His hand was warm, his grip gentle but firm. "Come back tomorrow," he said. "Same time." It wasn't a request. Over the following weeks, the lunches became a ritual. Every day at 1 o'clock, Amelia would sit across from Adrian Lancaster and pretend that this was normal, that there was nothing strange about the master of the house dining alone with a housemaid. They talked about books, about music, about the house and its history. He told her stories about his childhood, about growing up in Lancaster Manor with parents who were more interested in maintaining appearances than raising a child. She told him about the village where she'd grown up, about the aunt who'd taken her in grudgingly and reminded her daily that she was a burden. And slowly, carefully, they began to build something between them. What it was, Amelia couldn't say. It felt too fragile to name. But there were signs that something was shifting, changing into something neither of them could control. The way his eyes would linger on her mouth when she spoke. The way her breath would catch when his knee brushed against hers under the table. The way the air in the room seemed to thicken with each passing day, heavy with all the things they weren't saying. And then there were the gifts. After the necklace came a book of poetry, a first edition of Elizabeth Barrett Browning with an inscription in faded ink. "To my dearest E, who understands the language of the heart." Then a silk scarf in deep emerald that brought out the green flecks in her hazel eyes. Each gift appeared in her room with no note, no explanation, as if they'd simply materialized from thin air. She knew she should refuse them, knew that accepting them meant accepting something else, something undefined and dangerous. But she couldn't stop herself. Each gift felt like a piece of a puzzle she was trying to solve, a clue to understanding who Adrian Lancaster really was beneath the cold, controlled exterior. She began to notice other things too. The way Mrs. Cavendish watched her with increasing disapproval. The way Thomas, the groundskeeper, would shake his head sadly whenever she passed him in the gardens. The way Sarah had stopped speaking to her entirely, as if Amelia had become contaminated by something contagious. And she noticed the books. Tucked between the volumes in the library, she would find small pieces of paper with sentences written in Adrian's angular hand. They were never complete thoughts, just fragments. The heart wants what it wants. Some cages are made of silk and gold. I can put everything into this if you let me. That last one haunted her. What did it mean? Everything of what into what? The ambiguity of it made her chest ache with a longing she didn't fully understand. One night, unable to sleep, she found herself in the library again. It was past midnight, and the house was silent except for the usual creaks and groans. She was looking for another note, another clue, when she heard it. Music, coming from somewhere deeper in the house. Piano music, sad and beautiful and utterly heartbreaking. She followed the sound. It led her to the west wing, to the door she'd been told never to open. The music was coming from behind it, and it was the most achingly lonely sound she'd ever heard. Whoever was playing was pouring their soul into those keys, every note a confession of pain. She knew it was Adrian. She knew she shouldn't open that door, but her hand was already on the handle, turning it. And she was stepping inside before her mind could catch up with her body. The music room was exactly as she'd seen it from the gallery above, but now the piano was open, its lid raised, and Adrian sat at the bench with his back to her. He wore the same black pajama bottoms she'd seen him in before, nothing else, and his shoulders were rigid with tension as his fingers moved across the keys. He didn't stop playing when she entered, didn't acknowledge her presence at all. She stood in the doorway and listened as he finished the piece, a Chopin nocturne that seemed to split the air with its beauty. When the last note faded, the silence that followed felt sacred. I told you to stay away from the west wing, he said without turning around. I heard you playing. So, you decided to disobey a direct order. I couldn't help myself. He turned then, and the look on his face made her stomach drop. It was raw, unguarded, full of a pain so deep she felt it in her own chest. That seems to be a problem you have, Amelia. You can't help yourself. Neither can you. The words came out before she could stop them. He stood, and in 3 strides he was in front of her. Too close. Close enough that she could see the silver flecks in his dark eyes, could count the faint lines at the corners. Close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his bare skin. You don't know what you're talking about, he said, his voice low and dangerous. Don't I? Her heart was racing so fast she felt dizzy. The gifts, the lunches, the way you watch me when you think I'm not looking. If you want me to leave, tell me to leave. But stop pretending this is nothing. This is nothing. But his hand came up to touch the necklace at her throat, his fingers brushing her skin, and they both knew he was lying. Then why do you keep me here? His jaw clenched. Because I'm selfish. Because I'm repeating the same mistakes my family has been making for generations. Because I know better and I'm doing it anyway. His hand dropped. You should go. What if I don't want to? Then you're more foolish than I thought. They stood there, locked in a stalemate, the air between them crackling with tension. Amelia felt like she was standing at that cliff edge again, toes over the edge, wind in her face. One more step and she'd fall. One more step and there would be no going back. Tell me about Eleanor, she said. The name hung between them like a curse. Adrian's face went blank, that door slamming shut again. But this time Amelia didn't back down. She was your wife. She disappeared. No one knows what happened to her. Or maybe they do and they're just not telling. Go to bed, Amelia. Not until you tell me the truth. Did you love her? That's none of your concern. It is if you're using me to replace her. It is if I'm just the next in a long line of... She gestured at the walls, at the whole house. Whatever this is. Something shifted in his expression. Anger, maybe, or something close to it. You think you're the first housemaid I've taken an interest in? You think you're special. The words hit like a slap. But underneath the cruelty, she heard something else. Fear. He was trying to push her away, and she was stupid enough to let him. No, she said quietly. I don't think I'm special. But I think you wish I was." She left before he could respond, walked back through the forbidden west wing and up to her room with her head held high and tears streaming down her face. She didn't know why she was crying. Didn't know if it was from anger or hurt, or the terrible, crushing weight of wanting something she could never have. In her room, she tore off the necklace and threw it across the room. It hit the wall and fell to the floor with a small, pathetic sound. She waited for satisfaction, for relief. Instead, she felt empty. She didn't sleep that night. And when dawn came grey and cold through her window, she got up, put on her uniform and found the necklace where it had fallen. She picked it up, held it in her palm for a long moment, and then put it back on. Because whatever was happening between her and Adrian Lancaster, whatever twisted, dangerous thing was growing in the shadows of this house, she wasn't done with it yet. She wasn't done with him. And maybe that made her reckless after all. The days that followed were a study in avoidance. Adrian stopped requesting her presence at lunch. When their paths crossed in the corridors, he would turn and walk the other way, his footsteps echoing like accusations. Amelia told herself she was relieved. Told herself it was better this way, safer. But at night, alone in her narrow bed, she would touch the necklace at her throat and wonder what would have happened if she'd stayed silent that night in the music room. If she'd let him keep his secrets. Mrs. Cavendish seemed to sense the shift. Her disapproval transformed into something almost like satisfaction, as if she'd been waiting for this inevitable fracture. She piled more work onto Amelia's shoulders, sending her to clean rooms that hadn't been touched in decades, rooms where the dust was so thick it made her cough and the air tasted like forgotten things. It was in one of these rooms, a bedroom in the South Tower that smelled of mothballs and decay, that Amelia found the first real clue. She was stripping the bed, pulling off sheets that disintegrated in her hands, when something fell from between the mattress and the box spring. A book, small leather-bound with pages yellowed at the edges. Her diary. Amelia looked over her shoulder, suddenly paranoid, but she was alone. The door stood open, revealing an empty corridor beyond. She sat on the edge of the bed and opened the diary with trembling fingers. The first page bore an inscription in elegant cursive, Eleanor Rose Lancaster, 2019. Eleanor, Adrian's wife. The woman who had disappeared without explanation, leaving behind only questions and locked pianos, and a husband who played Chopin in the dark. Amelia knew she shouldn't read it. Knew it was a violation, a betrayal of privacy that would make her no better than the people who had turned this house into a museum of secrets. But her hands were already turning the pages, her eyes already drinking in the words written there. The early entries were mundane, descriptions of daily life at Lancaster Manor, observations about the staff, complaints about Mrs. Cavendish's rigidity. But as Amelia read deeper, a picture began to emerge that made her blood run cold. Eleanor had been a maid, just like Amelia. She'd come to Lancaster Manor at 20 years old, desperate for work, and had caught Adrian's attention almost immediately. The courtship, if it could be called that, had been intense and secretive. Gifts left in her room, private dinners, long conversations about art and literature and philosophy. Eleanor had fallen in love with him, completely and utterly, and he had seemed to love her back. But there were darker notes threaded through the romance. Eleanor wrote about feeling watched constantly, about the sensation that the house itself was observing her, judging her, finding her wanting. She wrote about the portraits in the gallery, about how she'd counted 17 young women who had worked at Lancaster Manor and died under suspicious circumstances. She wrote about asking Adrian about them and being told, just as Amelia had been told, to forget about it. And then there were the entries about the proposal. Adrian had asked Eleanor to marry him 3 months after she'd started working at the manor. It should have been romantic, a Cinderella story come to life. But Eleanor's writing suggested something else. She described the proposal as feeling like a trap closing around her, like she was being claimed rather than chosen. She wrote about his family's reaction, the cold fury from his mother before she died, the warnings from staff members who disappeared shortly after speaking to her. But she'd said yes anyway, because she loved him, because she thought she could change him, save him from whatever darkness lived in his bloodline, because she was young and stupid and believed in fairy tales. The wedding had been small, private, almost secretive. And then had come the strangest part. Eleanor wrote about how Adrian had changed after the marriage, How he'd become possessive, controlling, dictating what she wore, who she spoke to, where she could go in the house. How he'd forbidden her from leaving the grounds without his permission. How he'd started talking about legacy and duty and the importance of producing an heir. She'd tried to leave once, made it as far as the village before Adrian's men had found her and brought her back. After that, she'd stopped trying, stopped fighting. She'd become a ghost in her own life, drifting through the halls of Lancaster Manor like something already dead. The final entries were the most disturbing. Eleanor wrote about finding documents in Adrian's study, legal papers that suggested the Lancaster family had a history of this. Of finding young women from humble backgrounds, marrying them, and then making them disappear when they became inconvenient. The documents mentioned payoffs, threats, even violence. And they mentioned something else, something that made Amelia's hands shake so badly she nearly dropped the diary. A pattern. Every Lancaster man, going back 6 generations, had done the same thing. Found a young woman, usually a servant or someone from the working class, courted her obsessively, married her, and then, within a few years, she would vanish. Sometimes the official story was death in childbirth. Sometimes it was suicide. Sometimes it was simply that she'd left, run off with a lover or returned to her family. But Eleanor had traced them, these vanished wives, and none of them had ever been seen again. The diary ended abruptly. The last entry was dated October 31st, 2021, nearly 4 years ago. I found proof, Eleanor had written in handwriting that looked rushed, panicked. Documents that prove everything. I'm going to take them to the police tomorrow. I'm going to expose all of it, no matter what it costs. I can't live like this anymore. I can't be part of this. If something happens to me, if I disappear like the others, know that I didn't leave willingly. Know that I fought. Know that Adrian isn't who he pretends to be. He's not the victim of his family's legacy. He's the architect of it. And then nothing. No more entries. Just blank pages and the smell of mothballs, and Amelia's own ragged breathing. She sat there for a long time, the diary heavy in her lap, trying to process what she'd just read. It couldn't be true. It was the paranoid ramblings of a woman who'd been isolated too long, who'd let her imagination run wild. Adrian wasn't a monster. He was damaged, yes, and complicated, but not evil, not capable of what Eleanor was suggesting. But then she thought about the portraits in the gallery, the young women who'd all died too soon. The way Mrs. Cavendish had warned her about the West Wing, about questions, about getting too close. The way Sarah wouldn't meet her eyes anymore. The way Thomas shook his head sadly whenever he saw her, as if she were already lost. And she thought about her mother, who had worked here and disappeared without a trace, who might be just another name in the Lancaster family's long history of vanished women. Amelia stood on shaking legs and tucked the diary into her apron. She needed to think, needed to decide what to do with this information. Confront Adrian, run, go to the police with what she'd found? She was halfway to the door when she heard footsteps in the corridor. Heavy, deliberate, male. She froze, her heart hammering against her ribs. Adrian appeared in the doorway. He looked terrible, like he hadn't slept in days. His shirt was wrinkled, his hair uncombed, and there was a wildness in his eyes that made her take a step back. "What are you doing in here?" he asked, his voice rough. "Cleaning. Mrs. Cavendish told me to—" His gaze dropped to her apron, where the corner of the diary was visible. His expression changed, shuddering completely. "What's that?" "Nothing." He crossed the room in 3 strides and pulled the diary from her apron before she could stop him. He stared at it for a long moment, his jaw clenching and unclenching. "Where did you find this?" "Under the mattress." He looked at her, and there was something in his eyes that might have been pain or might have been rage. "Did you read it?" There was no point in lying. "Yes." He closed his eyes and took a deep breath like a man bracing for a blow. When he opened them again, the wildness was gone, replaced by something colder, more controlled. "Then I suppose we need to talk." He turned and walked out, clearly expecting her to follow. Amelia hesitated for only a moment before trailing after him, her mind racing. This was it. Whatever happened next would determine everything. Whether she stayed or left. Whether she lived or became another portrait on the wall. He led her to his study, a room she'd never been allowed to enter before. It was all dark wood and leather, walls lined with books and filing cabinets, A massive desk dominated the center, its surface covered in papers and an open laptop. He gestured to a chair across from the desk. "Sit." She sat. He moved to a cabinet in the corner and poured 2 glasses of whiskey neat. He handed her one without asking if she wanted it, then sat behind his desk with his own glass. "Ask your questions," he said. Amelia took a sip of whiskey. It burned going down, but it steadied her. "Is it true?" "What she wrote?" "That depends on which parts you're referring to." "All of it." "The pattern, the disappeared women, your family's history of—" She couldn't finish the sentence. He drank his whiskey in one swallow and set the glass down carefully. "My family has a complicated legacy. For generations, Lancaster men have been drawn to women from different social classes. It's not uncommon in aristocratic families. The heart wants what society forbids." "That's not an answer." "No," he agreed. "It's not." He leaned back in his chair, his face half in shadow. "Yes, there's a pattern. Yes, several women married into the Lancaster family and subsequently disappeared from public life. But Eleanor's theory about murder and conspiracy is melodramatic fiction. The truth is far more banal. Tell me, the women were paid, handsomely, to leave quietly and never speak of their time here. Some signed prenuptial agreements that included stipulations about silence. Others accepted settlements in exchange for annulments. A few, I believe, genuinely did die of natural causes or accidents. But none were murdered in some grand conspiracy. And my mother?" Something flickered across his face. "What about her?" "She worked here. She disappeared." "Was she paid off too?" He was quiet for a long moment. "I don't know. I was young when she worked here, barely 20. I don't remember her specifically. But if she left suddenly, it's possible my father made arrangements." "Your father?" "He was a bastard," said flatly, without emotion. "He believed the Lancaster name was sacred, and that anything that threatened its reputation had to be eliminated. Not through violence, but through money and legal pressure. He was very good at making problems disappear." Amelia felt like she was trying to solve a puzzle with half the pieces missing. "And Eleanor? What happened to her?" Adrian stood and walked to the window, looking out over the dark gardens. "Eleanor and I loved each other. At least I thought we did, but she couldn't adapt to this life. She felt trapped, suffocated. She started making wild accusations, talking about going to the press, destroying my family's reputation." He paused. "I gave her a choice. Take a generous settlement and start a new life somewhere else, quietly, or stay and continue to be miserable. She chose to leave." "Just like that? She just left?" He turned to face her, and his expression was unreadable. "Not just like that. It took months of negotiation. Lawyers were involved. Papers were signed. She's living in a cottage in Cornwall now, under a different name, with enough money to be comfortable for the rest of her life. I made sure of it. Why didn't you just tell people that? Why let everyone think she's dead or missing?" "Because a divorce would have raised questions. Questions about why we married in the first place, about our age difference, about the power dynamics. It was easier to let her fade away quietly." He moved closer, and Amelia fought the urge to shrink back. "I'm not proud of it. I'm not proud of any of it. But I didn't hurt her. I gave her what she wanted, freedom, in exchange for her silence." "Yes." Amelia stood, her legs unsteady. "How do I know you're telling the truth? How do I know she's really alive and safe?" "You don't." He said it simply, without artifice. "You'll have to decide whether to trust me or not." "That's insane. You're asking me to trust you when everything about this situation screams danger." I know, he was close now. Close enough that she could see the exhaustion in his eyes, the lines of strain around his mouth. "But I'm telling you the truth anyway. Eleanor is alive. She's safe, and she wanted to leave." "Did she? Or did you make her want to leave?" His jaw clenched. "That's not fair. None of this is fair." The words burst out of her loud in the quiet study. "Oh, you bring me here, you give me gifts, you look at me like—" She stopped, her face flushing. "Like I matter. Like I'm not just another girl in a long line of girls. And then I find out that every woman who's ever been in my position has disappeared. How am I supposed to feel about that?" "You're supposed to run." His voice was low, intense. "You're supposed to take what you've learned and get the hell out of this house and never look back. Is that what you want?" "It's what you should do." "That's not what I asked." They stood there, the air between them thick with tension. Amelia could hear her own heartbeat. could feel the whiskey burning in her stomach, could see the way Adrian's hands were clenched into fists at his sides like he was fighting himself. "No," he said finally. "It's not what I want. I want you to stay. I want you here in this house, where I can see you and talk to you and pretend for a little while that I'm not exactly what my family made me. But I'm trying for once in my life to do the right thing, to warn you off before it's too late." What if it's already too late? The question hung between them. Adrian's eyes darkened, and Amelia saw something in them that made her breath catch. Hunger. Need. The same desperate longing she felt clawing at her own chest. "Then God help us both," he said, and closed the distance between them. His mouth on hers was nothing like she'd imagined in her rare moments of honesty with herself. It wasn't gentle or tentative. It was consuming, desperate, like a man drowning and she was air. His hands came up to frame her face, fingers threading through her hair, and she made a sound she'd never made before, something between a gasp and a sob. She kissed him back with everything she had, all the fear and confusion and want that had been building since the moment she'd first seen him in the library doorway. Her hands found his chest, feeling the rapid thud of his heart beneath her palms, and then she was pulling at his shirt, needing to feel skin, needing to know he was real and not just another ghost in this house of ghosts. He broke the kiss only long enough to pull her closer, his arms banding around her waist. And then his mouth was on her neck, her jaw, the sensitive spot behind her ear that made her knees buckle. She'd never been touched like this, had never let anyone close enough to learn what made her body sing. But Adrian seemed to know instinctively. Every touch, every kiss, every soft word murmured against her skin was precisely calculated to undo her. "We should stop," he said, even as his hands slid beneath her uniform, finding bare skin that had never been touched by anyone but her. "Don't." She didn't recognize her own voice, rough and pleading. "Don't stop." Amelia, her name was a prayer and a curse. "If we do this, there's no going back. You understand that? Everything changes." She pulled back just enough to look at him, to see the conflict written plainly on his face. He meant it. He was giving her one last chance to run, to save herself from whatever this was becoming. She should take it, should walk out of this study and pack her bags and leave Lancaster Manor in her rearview mirror. Should go back to her small, safe life, where the most dangerous thing was boredom, and the greatest passion was a particularly good book. But she'd never felt more alive than she did in this moment, with this damaged, dangerous man looking at her like she was salvation and damnation wrapped in one small package. And maybe that made her reckless after all. Maybe it made her a fool. But she'd spent 22 years being careful, being quiet, being invisible. Just once she wanted to be seen. "I understand," she said and kissed him again. He made a sound low in his throat, something animal and desperate. And then he was lifting her, setting her on the edge of his desk, papers scattering to the floor. His hands were everywhere, learning her, claiming her, and she arched into his touch like a flower towards sun. But just as his fingers found the buttons of her uniform, there was a knock at the door. They froze. Adrian's forehead dropped to her shoulder, and she could feel him shaking, whether from desire or frustration or fear, she couldn't tell. "Mr. Lancaster?" Mrs. Cavendish's voice, sharp and disapproving even through the heavy wood. "There's a phone call for you. They say it's urgent." Adrian pulled back, his breathing ragged. He looked at Amelia for a long moment, his expression tortured, and then he stepped away, putting distance between them. "I'll take it in a moment," he called out. Footsteps retreated down the corridor. Amelia slid off the desk on shaking legs, trying to button her uniform with fingers that wouldn't cooperate. Her whole body was on fire, aching with interrupted need. "You should go," Adrian said, not looking at her. "Adrian, please." The word came out broken. "Just go." She went, back through the corridors, up the stairs, into her little room where she locked the door and pressed her back against it, and tried to remember how to breathe. Her lips were swollen from his kisses. Her skin still burned where he'd touched her. And between her legs was an ache that was entirely new, entirely unwelcome, entirely all-consuming. She touched her mouth, remembering the taste of him, whiskey and mint and something darker. She should be afraid, should be planning her escape. Instead, all she could think about was going back down those stairs, back to that study, back to him. She was in so much trouble. The next few days were torture. Adrian avoided her completely, and she threw herself into work to avoid thinking about what had happened. But her body remembered. At night, alone in her bed, she would touch herself and think of his hands, his mouth, the desperate sound he'd made when she'd kissed him back. She'd never done this before, never let herself explore her own desire. But now it was like a dam had broken. She learned what made her gasp, what made her arch, what made her bite her lip to keep from crying out. And she imagined it was him touching her, him learning these secrets, him making her come apart. She felt like she was losing her mind. It was Sarah who inadvertently provided the next piece of the puzzle. The girl had been avoiding Amelia for weeks, but one morning at breakfast, she slipped a piece of paper across the table when Mrs. Cavendish wasn't looking. Amelia unfolded it in the privacy of her room. It was an address in a village about 20 miles away, and beneath it, 2 words, "She's there. Eleanor." It had to be. Sarah was telling her where to find Eleanor. Amelia stared at the paper for a long time, her mind racing. If she went, if she found Eleanor and learned the truth directly from her, she'd have to face whatever that truth was. If Adrian had lied, if Eleanor was being held against her will or living in fear, Amelia would have to do something about it. Report him, leave, something. But if he'd told the truth, if Eleanor really had chosen to leave and was living happily somewhere else, then what? Did that make what was happening between her and Adrian okay? Did it absolve him of his family's sins? She didn't know, but she had to find out. The next morning she told Mrs. Cavendish she needed to go to the village for personal items. The woman looked suspicious but didn't forbid it. Amelia caught the bus that stopped at the end of the long drive and rode it to the address Sarah had given her. The cottage was small and tidy, with a garden full of autumn flowers and lace curtains in the windows. It looked peaceful, safe. Nothing like the prison Eleanor had described in her diary. Amelia knocked before she could lose her courage. The woman who answered was in her late 40s, with auburn hair going grey at the temples and eyes that were wary but kind. She was beautiful in a faded sort of way, like a photograph left too long in the sun. "Can I help you?" she asked. "Are you Eleanor Lancaster?" The woman's expression shuttered immediately. "Who are you?" "My name is Amelia Rivers. I work at Lancaster Manor. I found your diary." For a long moment Eleanor just stared at her. Then she stepped back and opened the door wider. "You'd better come in." The cottage was cozy, filled with books and paintings and the smell of fresh bread. Eleanor made tea and they sat in the small living room, and Amelia studied the woman who had haunted her thoughts for weeks. "How did you find me?" Eleanor asked. "One of the staff gave me your address. I think she was trying to warn me." Eleanor smiled sadly. "Smart girl. I tried to warn people too before I left. No one listened. Is it true, what you wrote in the diary, about Adrian, about his family?" Eleanor was quiet for a moment, cradling her teacup. "Yes and no. I was paranoid toward the end, seeing conspiracies everywhere. But the basic facts were true. The Lancaster family has a pattern. They find young women, usually from working-class backgrounds, and they seduce them. Sometimes they marry them, sometimes they don't, but eventually the women disappear from public life. But you're here. You're alive and free. I am. Because I made a deal." Eleanor set down her cup. "I agreed to leave quietly, to take the money and the new identity, and never speak about my time at Lancaster Manor. I signed legal documents that would ruin me financially if I ever broke the agreement. So yes, I'm free. But I'm also gagged. Did Adrian hurt you?" Eleanor's eyes grew distant. "Not physically, but emotionally. Yes, he's not a monster, Amelia. That's the worst part. He's just a man trapped in a family legacy he doesn't know how to escape. He loved me in his way, but his love was suffocating, possessive. He wanted to own me, shape me, make me into what he needed me to be. And when I resisted, when I tried to be my own person, he couldn't handle it. But he let you go. Only after I threatened to go public with everything I'd found. Only after I made it clear I'd rather die than stay." Eleanor leaned forward. "Why are you here, Amelia? What did he do to you?" Amelia's face flushed. "Nothing. I mean, he's been kind to me. We've had lunch together, and he's given me gifts, and we—" She trailed off, unable to finish. Eleanor's expression turned sad. "Oh, honey, you're falling for him, aren't you? I don't know what I'm doing. That's how it starts. The attention, the gifts, the feeling of being special. He makes you feel like you're the only person in the world who understands him. Like you're the one who can save him from his demons. Eleanor reached across and took Amelia's hand. I'm not saying run. That's your choice. But I'm telling you, if you stay, you need to go in with your eyes open. Adrian Lancaster is not a fairy tale prince. He's a complicated, damaged man with a family history. That's toxic. He will try to control you, even if he doesn't mean to. He will make you question your own reality. And if you try to leave, he will make it very difficult. He told me you were alive, that you chose to leave, that you were happy. The first two are true. The third? Eleanor shrugged. I'm alive. I have money, freedom, this cottage. But happy? I don't know if I'll ever be happy again. He took something from me, Amelia. My ability to trust, maybe. Or my belief in love. I look at couples now and I feel nothing but cynicism. They talked for another hour, Eleanor sharing stories about her time at Lancaster Manor, about Adrian's controlling behavior, his mood swings, his desperate need for connection, coupled with his inability to truly let anyone in. She talked about the house itself, how it seemed to amplify everything, make small conflicts into huge dramas, turn love into obsession. But she also talked about the good times, the way Adrian could be tender and funny and brilliant, the way he'd made her feel cherished in moments. The complexity of him, the contradiction. If you do stay, Eleanor said as Amelia was leaving, protect yourself. Keep copies of everything. Have an escape plan. Don't sign anything without reading it carefully. And for God's sake, don't let him isolate you from the outside world. Amelia nodded, her mind spinning. Can I ask you one more thing? Of course. Do you still love him? Eleanor's smile was bitter. Every damn day, that's the worst part. He broke me and I still love him. I hate myself for it, but I can't seem to stop. On the bus ride back to Lancaster Manor, Amelia stared out the window and tried to make sense of everything. Eleanor was alive and free, which meant Adrian hadn't lied. But Eleanor was also damaged, broken in ways that might never heal. Was that what Amelia was walking into? A love that would consume her and leave her hollow? She thought about running, about packing her bags and leaving tonight, putting as much distance as possible between herself and Adrian Lancaster. But even as she thought it, she knew she couldn't. Whatever was between them was already too deep, had its hooks in too far. She was going to stay. She was going to see this through wherever it led. And God help her, she was going to give him everything she had, even though she knew it might destroy her. When she got back to the manor, it was late afternoon. The house was quiet, shadows gathering in the corners. She went up to her room to change out of her street clothes and found something waiting on her pillow. A key, old and brass and ornate, and beneath it a note in Adrian's handwriting. The West Wing, tonight 11 p.m. if you're brave enough. Amelia picked up the key, felt its weight in her palm. This was it, the moment of decision. She could ignore the note, throw away the key, pretend she'd never seen it. Or she could go, step through whatever door this key opened and accept whatever came after. She thought of Eleanor in her cottage, alive but broken. She thought of her mother, disappeared without a trace. She thought of all the women in the portraits, young and dead and forgotten. And then she thought of Adrian's mouth on hers, his desperate words, the way he'd looked at her like she was the only thing in the world that mattered. At 10:59 p.m., Amelia stood outside the locked door of the West Wing, the key trembling in her hand. She could hear her own heartbeat loud and fast, could feel adrenaline singing through her veins. She inserted the key and turned it. The lock clicked open with a sound like fate sealing itself. She pushed open the door and stepped into the darkness beyond, letting it swallow her whole. The West Wing was nothing like Amelia had imagined. She'd expected decay, abandonment, rooms frozen in time like Miss Havisham's wedding chamber. Instead, she found herself in a corridor lit by soft amber lights. The walls painted a deep burgundy that seemed to absorb the glow. The floor was polished wood, covered here and there with Persian rugs that muffled her footsteps. It felt lived in, cared for, secret. She walked slowly, her heart hammering, passing closed doors on either side. At the end of the corridor, light spilled from beneath a door left slightly ajar. She could hear music, that same Chopin nocturne he'd been playing the night she'd first entered this forbidden space. Amelia pushed the door open. The room was a sanctuary. Where the rest of Lancaster Manor felt like a museum, this room felt alive. Bookshelves lined 2 walls, stuffed with volumes that looked actually read rather than merely displayed. A fireplace crackled with real flames, casting dancing shadows across the furniture. The piano stood in one corner, its lid open, but Adrian wasn't sitting at it. He stood by the window staring out at the dark gardens, a glass of whiskey in his hand. He'd changed since she'd last seen him. He wore dark trousers and a black shirt with the sleeves rolled up, and his feet were bare. His hair was damp like he'd recently showered. He looked younger somehow, more vulnerable without the armor of his usual formal attire. "You came," he said without turning around. "You asked me to. I gave you a choice. You could have stayed away." "Could I?" She closed the door behind her, heard the click of the latch. "I'm not sure I've had a choice in any of this since the moment I arrived." He turned then, and the look in his eyes made her breath catch, raw, hungry, desperate. "You always have a choice, Amelia. That's what separates you from them, from Eleanor, from all the others. You're here because you want to be, not because I've manipulated you into it. Haven't you, though? The gifts, the attention, the secrets. You've been pulling me deeper into this since day one. Have I?" He set down his glass and moved toward her. "Or have you been choosing to go deeper all on your own? I gave you warnings. I told you to run. I showed you exactly what I am. And you're still here." He was right, and she hated him for it. Hated that he could see through her so clearly. Could name the things she'd been refusing to acknowledge. She'd had 100 chances to leave. 100 moments where she could have chosen safety over this terrible, consuming want. And she'd rejected every single one. "I went to see Eleanor today," she said. Adrian's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. "I know Thomas saw you getting on the bus. You had me followed. I had you watched. There's a difference. I wanted to make sure you came back. Would you have stopped me if I'd tried to leave?" "No." He said it simply, but there was pain underneath. "I would have let you go. I would have hated it. Would have probably drunk myself into oblivion, but I would have let you go." "What did she tell you?" Amelia thought about lying, but what was the point? "That you're not a monster, but you're damaged. That you'll try to control me even if you don't mean to. That your love is suffocating. All true." He was close now, so close she could smell whiskey and soap and something uniquely him. "I am all of those things. I'm also obsessed with you in a way that's probably unhealthy. I think about you constantly. When you're cleaning, when you're reading, when you're sleeping in that narrow bed 3 floors above me. I imagine what you taste like, what sounds you make, how you'd look spread out beneath me." Heat flooded through her, pooling low in her belly. "Adrian, I know I shouldn't. I know there's a power imbalance, that I'm too old for you, that this is repeating every mistake my family has ever made. But I can't seem to stop myself. You've gotten under my skin in a way no one has in years. Maybe ever. Eleanor said she still loves you, even after everything." Something crossed his face. Guilt, maybe, or regret. "I know. I never wanted to hurt her, but I did anyway, because I didn't know how to love her without trying to possess her. I thought if I could just keep her close enough, control enough of her world, she'd never leave. Instead, I drove her away. And you think you'll do the same to me? I know I will. Unless—" He reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers lingering on her cheek. "Unless you're strong enough to push back. To tell me when I'm being unreasonable, to maintain your own identity, to not let me consume you completely. Is that why you invited me here? To see if I'm strong enough? I invited you here because I'm selfish and weak, and I wanted you in my private space, where I can pretend for a few hours that the rest of the world doesn't exist." He pulled his hand back, as if touching her burned him. "This room is the only place in the manor that's truly mine. Not my father's, not the family's, mine. I've never brought anyone here before, not even Eleanor." Amelia looked around with new eyes, seeing the personal touches she'd missed before. Photographs on the mantel, candid shots of Adrian at different ages, a ratty armchair by the fire that didn't match the other furniture, but looked well loved, a guitar propped in the corner, worn from use. This wasn't just a room, it was a refuge. And he'd invited her into it. "Why me?" she asked quietly. "Of all the women who've worked here, why am I different?" "I don't know." He returned to the window, his back to her. "Maybe you're not. Maybe in 5 years you'll be living in a cottage somewhere, taking my money and hating me. Maybe this is just the same pattern playing out again. But you don't think so. No. He turned, and the vulnerability in his expression nearly undid her. I think you're going to save me or destroy me. I just don't know which yet. Amelia crossed the room until she stood directly in front of him. She was tired of dancing around this, tired of the push and pull, the advance and retreat. If she was going to do this, she was going to do it with her eyes open. I found out something else today, she said. Something Eleanor told me about the women in the portraits. The ones who died young. What about them? They weren't all wives. Some were just servants who caught the wrong man's attention. And they didn't all die of natural causes. Some died trying to leave. Some died after threatening to expose family secrets. She watched his face carefully. Did you know that? His jaw clenched. I knew some of it. My father wasn't a good man, Amelia. None of the Lancaster men have been. We've used our money and position to take what we wanted and silence anyone who objected. I'm not proud of that legacy. I've spent my adult life trying to be different. Have you succeeded? You tell me. Am I keeping you here against your will? Am I threatening you? Am I making you sign away your rights in exchange for my affection? No, but you are doing something maybe worse. What's that? Making me want to stay even though I know I shouldn't. The air between them crackled with tension. Adrian's hands clenched into fists at his sides, and Amelia could see him fighting himself, fighting the urge to reach for her. There's something else you should know, he said, his voice rough. About your mother. Amelia's heart stuttered. What about her? He moved to a desk in the corner and pulled out a file folder. He hesitated, holding it, then handed it to her. I had this investigated after I learned your last name, after I realized who you must be. Amelia opened the folder with shaking hands. Inside were documents, photographs, official-looking papers with stamps and signatures. She scanned them quickly, trying to make sense of what she was seeing. Her mother. Photographs of a young woman who looked eerily like Amelia. Same dark hair and hazel eyes, same slight build. Documents showing she'd been employed at Lancaster Manor from 1985 to 1987, and then a death certificate. She's dead? Amelia's voice came out strangled. I'm sorry. She died in 1988, about a year after leaving the manor. Car accident on the M1, she was alone. No evidence of foul play. But everyone said she disappeared. She did, from your perspective, but she didn't vanish mysteriously. She left the manor, moved to Manchester, and died a year later. Your relatives probably didn't tell you because it was painful, or because they didn't know the full story themselves. Amelia stared at the death certificate, at her mother's name printed there in official type. Maria Rivers, deceased at age 24. All these years she'd imagined her mother alive somewhere, maybe happy, maybe not, but alive. And she'd been dead the whole time. Why didn't they tell me? I don't know. Fear maybe, or shame. There's more. Adrian pointed to another document. She was pregnant when she left the manor. 3 months. The room tilted. Amelia grabbed the edge of the desk to steady herself. Pregnant. With me? Yeah. Was she involved with someone here? With a Lancaster. Adrian's expression was carefully neutral. The timeline is unclear. But yes, it's possible. My father was alive then, and he had a history of... He stopped, seeming to choose his words carefully. Inappropriate relationships with staff. The implication hit Amelia like a physical blow. You think your father might be my father? I don't know. It's possible. I had DNA testing done on myself and compared it to what I could find of your mother's genetic information from the death investigation. We share some markers, but nothing conclusive. You could be my half-sister, or you could just be the daughter of a woman who worked here briefly and left. Amelia sat down heavily in the armchair by the fire, her mind reeling. This whole time, she might have been connected to the Lancasters by blood. She might be part of this twisted family tree, another branch in a diseased genealogy. Why didn't you tell me before? She asked. Before we... She gestured between them, unable to finish. Because I'm not certain. The evidence is circumstantial, and because I was selfish and didn't want to scare you away. He knelt in front of her chair, bringing himself to her eye level. But I couldn't let this go any further without you knowing. If there's any chance we're related, even distantly, we need to stop this now. You had yourself tested. What were the results? Inconclusive. We'd need your DNA to be certain, and I didn't want to do that without your permission. Amelia looked at him, this man who'd consumed her thoughts for weeks, who'd awakened desires she didn't know she had, who might be her half-brother. The thought should have disgusted her, should have killed whatever she felt for him instantly. Instead, she just felt numb. "I need to think," she said. "Of course. Take all the time you need." He stood, putting distance between them again. "I can arrange for discreet DNA testing. We'll know for certain within a week. And if we are related?" His face was bleak. "Then I'll help you get as far away from here as possible. I'll give you money, references, whatever you need to start over somewhere else. And I'll never contact you again. And if we're not?" He was quiet for a long moment. "Then I'll probably do something catastrophically stupid, like ask you to stay. Like beg you to take a chance on a broken man who's terrified he's going to ruin you." Amelia stood and walked to him. She reached up and touched his face, feeling the rough stubble on his jaw, the warmth of his skin. He closed his eyes like her touch caused him pain. "I met Eleanor," she said softly. "I saw what loving you did to her, and I'm still here. What does that say about me?" "That you're braver than she was. Or more foolish. I genuinely don't know which. Maybe both." She let her hand drop. "Do the test. I need to know the truth before we go any further." He nodded, relief and dread warring in his expression. "I'll arrange it tomorrow." "Good." She turned to leave, then stopped. "Adrian, why did you really bring me here tonight? To this room?" He looked at her, and there was such naked longing in his eyes that it stole her breath. "Because I wanted you to see who I really am. Not the master of the manor, not the inheritor of a toxic legacy. Just me, Adrian, a man who's probably beyond saving but can't seem to stop hoping you might try anyway. I'm not here to save you. I know. That's what makes this so dangerous." That night Amelia lay in her narrow bed and stared at the ceiling, her mind spinning. She might be Adrian's half-sister. She might be entangled in an incestuous attraction that would destroy them both if it came to light. Or she might just be another girl from a working-class background who'd caught a Lancaster man's attention and was about to learn the same painful lessons all the others had learned. She thought about running again, about packing her bags and leaving before the DNA results came back, before she had to face whatever truth they revealed. But she knew she wouldn't. She was in too deep now, had invested too much of herself in understanding this mystery, and there was another truth she couldn't ignore. Even knowing that Adrian might be her half-brother, even seeing the wreckage of his relationship with Eleanor, even understanding the pattern she was stepping into, she still wanted him. Still felt that pull, that magnetic attraction that defied logic and reason and common sense. What did that say about her? About the kind of person she was becoming in this house? She didn't know. And that terrified her more than anything else. The DNA test was done the next morning. A private doctor came to the manor, took samples from both Amelia and Adrian with professional discretion, and left with promises of results within 5 days. 5 days that stretched ahead like a prison sentence. Adrian avoided her during that time, and she was grateful for it. She needed space to think, to process everything she'd learned. She worked mechanically, cleaning rooms and polishing silver, and trying not to imagine what the results would say. But at night, she would find small gifts in her room. Not jewelry or expensive items, but personal things. A book of poetry with certain passages underlined. A sketch of the gardens done in charcoal, beautiful and melancholy. A recording of the Chopin nocturne he'd been playing, performed by a pianist she'd never heard of, but whose interpretation made her cry. He was courting her, even while keeping his distance. Showing her who he was through these small offerings, letting her decide if she wanted what he had to give. On the third day, Sarah finally spoke to her again. They were in the kitchen, alone except for the cook who was old and deaf and paid them no attention. "You're in love with him," Sarah said. It wasn't a question. Amelia didn't deny it. "Is it that obvious?" To anyone who's watching, Mrs. Cavendish is furious. She thinks you're going to end up like all the others. What do you think? Sarah was quiet for a moment, washing dishes with methodical precision. "I think you're different, stronger, but I also think this house has a way of breaking strong people, making them into something they never intended to be." "How long have you worked here?" 2 years. "Before that, I was in foster care, bouncing from home to home. Mr. Lancaster offered me a job when I aged out of the system. He's been kind to me in his way. Never inappropriate, just kind." "Then why do you look so sad all the time?" Sarah's hands stilled in the dishwater. Because I've seen things. Heard things. This house has secrets, Amelia. Old ones and new ones, and people who get too close to those secrets tend to disappear. Like my mother. Sarah looked at her sharply. You know about her. I know she worked here. I know she died a year after leaving. What I don't know is why she left. She was scared. I found some old staff records once hidden in the basement. There were notes about her, about how she'd become paranoid, talking about being watched, about feeling trapped. And then one day she was just gone. Was she involved with someone here? Sarah hesitated. There were rumors about her and the old Mr. Lancaster, but they were just rumors. No one knew for sure. Amelia felt sick. More confirmation of what Adrian had suggested. Her mother had been another young woman caught in the Lancaster orbit, another victim of their toxic need to possess and control. Sarah, why are you telling me this? Because I like you, and because I don't want to see you end up like her, or like Eleanor, or like any of the others. She dried her hands on her apron. Be careful, Amelia. Whatever you feel for him, whatever he feels for you, this house won't let it end well. It never does. That night, Amelia couldn't sleep. She paced her room, too restless to settle, too anxious to read or even think straight. Around 2 a.m., she gave up and slipped out into the corridors. She found herself drawn to the portrait gallery, standing again in front of the painting of the girl who'd fallen from the North Tower. Catherine, dead at 23. Had she been in love with a Lancaster man too? Had she thought she was different, special, strong enough to break the pattern? Couldn't sleep either. Amelia spun around. Adrian stood in the doorway, wearing the same black pajama bottoms and nothing else. His torso was a map of scars in the dim light, each one telling a story she didn't know. I keep thinking about her, Amelia said, turning back to the portrait. About all of them. All these women who came here and never left. Not really. I know, he moved to stand beside her. I think about them too. About the lives they might have had if they'd never met a Lancaster man. If they'd made different choices. Do you think they had a choice? Real choice, I mean, not just the illusion of it? I'd like to think so. But I don't know. My family has always been good at making people think they want what we want them to want. They stood in silence, looking at the portrait. Then Amelia asked the question that had been burning in her mind for days. What if the test comes back positive? What if we are related? Then we end this completely. No contact, no gifts, nothing. Shall give you money to start over somewhere else, and you'll go. And if it comes back negative? He turned to look at her, and the intensity in his eyes made her knees weak. Then I'm going to ask you for something I have no right to ask for. What? A chance. A real one. Not this half-measured thing where we're both terrified and holding back. I want to see if we can build something that isn't toxic, that isn't a repetition of old patterns. I want to try to love you in a way that doesn't destroy you. You're assuming I want that, and don't you? She did. God help her, she did. Despite everything she'd learned, all the warnings, all the evidence that this could only end badly, she wanted to see what they could be together. Wanted to explore this connection that felt like nothing she'd ever experienced. What about Eleanor? What about your track record? I can't change the past. All I can do is promise to try to be better. To listen when you tell me I'm being controlling. To give you space when you need it. To let you maintain your own identity, your own dreams. He reached out and took her hand, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. I'm not asking you to fix me, Amelia. I'm asking you to be with me while I try to fix myself. That's a lot to ask. I know. Too much, probably. But I'm asking anyway. Amelia looked down at their joined hands. His was so much larger than hers, scarred and strong and trembling slightly. She thought about all the reasons she should say no. The age gap. The power imbalance. The possibility they were related. The long history of failed relationships and broken women. Every rational thought in her head screamed at her to walk away. But there was another voice, quieter but more insistent. The voice that had been growing louder since the moment she'd first seen him in the library doorway. The voice that said this man, this damaged, complicated, dangerous man, saw her in a way no one ever had. That when she was with him she felt more alive, more real. More herself than she'd ever felt in her 22 years. Ask me again, she said, after we get the results. He nodded and lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. 5 more days. 5 more days. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. The next morning, Amelia was cleaning one of the guest rooms when she heard shouting from downstairs. Male voices, angry and getting louder. She crept to the landing and peered down. A man stood in the entrance hall, well-dressed and red-faced, yelling at Adrian. She couldn't make out all the words, but she caught enough. Helena's name, lawyers, breach of contract. You were supposed to keep her silent, the man was shouting. That was the agreement. She keeps quiet. We all move on with our lives. But she's been talking, Adrian, telling her story to anyone who'll listen. Do you know what this could do to the family reputation? I don't care about the family reputation, Richard. Adrian's voice was cold, controlled. Eleanor is free to tell her story. I won't stop her. You won't stop her. After everything we did to make this go away quietly, after the money we paid, the agreements we signed, the man, Richard, stepped closer. She's talking about abuse, Adrian. About being held prisoner. About the pattern of disappeared women. If this gets out, if the press gets hold of it, we're ruined. Then maybe we deserve to be ruined. Richard's face went purple. You selfish bastard. This isn't just about you. This is about the family name, the business, everything our father built. And you're willing to throw it all away for what? Some misplaced sense of guilt. Some idiotic idea of redemption. Tie it out of my house. This isn't your house. It's the family's house. And as your brother, I have just as much right. Brother or not, I'm telling you to leave now. Amelia's mind raced. Brother. Richard was Adrian's brother, which meant this was a family matter, a conflict that went deeper than she'd realized. And they were talking about Eleanor, about keeping her silent about agreements and money. What had really happened when Eleanor left? Richard stormed out, slamming the door so hard the chandelier shook. Adrian stood in the entrance hall for a long moment, his shoulders rigid with tension, and then he looked up. His eyes met Amelia's across the distance. Come down here, he said. She descended the stairs slowly, her heart pounding. When she reached the bottom, Adrian grabbed her hand and pulled her into his study, closing the door behind them. You heard, he said. Yes. I need to tell you something. About Eleanor, about what really happened. Amelia sat down, bracing herself. I'm listening. Adrian poured himself a drink, downed it, poured another. When Eleanor wanted to leave, it wasn't as simple as I made it sound. My brother Richard, he was furious. Said it would look bad that people would ask questions. He wanted to handle it the old way. Threats, intimidation, maybe worse. I refused. Told him we'd give Eleanor money and let her go peacefully. But Richard went behind my back. He had lawyers draw up documents that were more restrictive than what I'd agreed to. Non-disclosure agreements with teeth. Contracts that would bankrupt Eleanor if she ever spoke publicly about her time here. I didn't know about them until after she'd signed. Why did she sign them if they were so restrictive? Because Richard made her believe she had no choice. He told her if she didn't sign, he'd make sure she never worked again, never had a moment of peace. He's very good at making threats sound like friendly advice. Amelia felt cold. And you let him do this? I didn't let him. I didn't know until it was done. By the time I found out, Eleanor was already gone and the contracts were signed. I've been trying to get her released from them ever since, but Richard fights me at every turn. So she's not really free. She's just in a different kind of prison. Yes, the admissions seem to cost him. And now she's talking anyway, damn the consequences. And Richard wants me to enforce the contracts, to sue her into silence or worse. Will you? He looked at her like she'd slapped him. No, never. I'd rather lose everything than hurt her again. Even if it means losing the manor, the family business. Everything? Even then. Amelia stood and walked to the window, trying to process this new information. Everything was more complicated than she'd thought. Adrian wasn't just a man trying to escape his family's toxic legacy. He was actively fighting against a brother who wanted to maintain it. And Eleanor wasn't just an ex-wife living quietly in Cornwall. She was a woman preparing to go to war, and her testimony could bring down the entire Lancaster family. What does this mean for us? She asked quietly. I don't know. The DNA results come back in 2 days. If we're related, this all becomes moot anyway. If we're not, he trailed off. If we're not, then you need to decide if you want to be part of this. Part of a family that's about to implode. Part of a scandal that could make headlines. Because if Eleanor goes public, if she tells her story, you'll be caught in the crossfire too. People will ask questions about why you're here, what your relationship to me is. They'll dig into your past, your mother's past. It won't be pretty. Amelia turned to face him. Are you trying to scare me away again? I'm trying to be honest with you. For once in my life, I'm not manipulating or controlling or trying to shape the narrative. I'm just telling you the truth and letting you decide what to do with it. She walked back to him, stood close enough to feel the heat radiating from his body. What do you want me to do? Say, but only if it's what you really want. Only if you're going into this with your eyes open. And if the DNA test says we're related. His expression crumpled. Then I'll let you go. It'll kill me, but I'll let you go. Amelia reached up and cupped his face in her hands, feeling the stubble on his jaw, the heat of his skin. 2 more days. 2 more days, he agreed and pulled her into his arms. They stood there holding each other, and Amelia felt something shift inside her. This wasn't just attraction anymore. It wasn't just desire or curiosity, or the thrill of the forbidden. This was something deeper, more dangerous. This was the beginning of love, real and terrifying and completely insane. And in 2 days she'd know if it was possible or if it was the worst mistake of her life. The wait was agonizing. Amelia threw herself into work, scrubbing floors until her hands were raw, polishing silver until she could see her reflection in it. But nothing could quiet the anxiety humming under her skin. On the evening before the results were due, she found Adrian in the music room again, playing that same Chopin nocturne. She sat on the floor and listened, letting the music wash over her. When he finished, he turned to her. Whatever happens tomorrow, he said, I want you to know something. What? You've changed me. In these few weeks, you've made me want to be better, to break free of the patterns that have defined my family for generations, to actually try to build something healthy and real. Whether we end up together or not, I'll always be grateful for that. Amelia felt tears prick her eyes. Don't talk like this is goodbye. I'm preparing for the possibility. If we can't be together romantically, I still want you in my life somehow. As a friend, maybe, or at least someone I don't have to pretend with. And if we can be together. He smiled and it transformed his face. Then I'm going to spend every day proving to you that I'm worth the risk, that we can build something different, something that doesn't end in tragedy. The next morning, the doctor returned with the results. Adrian called Amelia to his study, and they sat together on the leather couch, the envelope between them like a bomb waiting to detonate. Do you want to open it? Adrian asked. Together, Amelia said. He nodded and picked up the envelope, his hands shaking slightly. He tore it open, pulled out the single sheet of paper inside and read it. His face went completely blank. What does it say? Amelia's voice came out as a whisper. Adrian looked at her, and there was such relief in his eyes that she knew the answer before he said it. We're not related. There's no genetic connection between us at all. The relief that flooded through her was so intense, it was almost painful. We're not related. No. He set down the paper and turned to her, his expression raw, which means I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer honestly. What? Do you want this? Do you want me? Knowing everything you know, understanding all the risks, are you willing to take a chance on us? Amelia looked at him. This complicated, damaged, beautiful man who'd awakened something in her she'd never known existed. She thought about all the reasons she should say no, all the warnings she'd received, all the evidence that this could only end in disaster. And then she thought about how she felt when she was with him, seen, understood, alive. Yes, she said. I want this. I want you. The kiss that followed was different from the desperate, frantic kiss in the study weeks ago. This was slower, deeper, a promise rather than a plea. His hands came up to frame her face, thumbs stroking her cheekbones, and she melted into him, letting herself feel everything she'd been holding back. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Adrian rested his forehead against hers. I'm going to mess this up, he said, probably multiple times. I'm going to be controlling and possessive and make mistakes. But I swear to you, I'll try. I'll try to be the man you deserve. I don't want perfect, Amelia said. I just want real. Then real is what you'll get. He stood and pulled her to her feet, and she saw the question in his eyes. Are you ready? Is this really what you want? She nodded, and he led her from the study through the corridors to the west wing, to his room, his sanctuary. And this time when they crossed the threshold, They both knew there was no going back. Tomorrow they would face whatever consequences came from this choice. Tomorrow they would deal with Richard and Eleanor and the impending scandal. Tomorrow they would figure out how to navigate a relationship that defied every rule and expectation. But tonight was just for them. For exploring this connection that had been building since the moment she'd first walked through the doors of Lancaster Manor. For discovering each other in ways that went beyond words. For finally giving in to the want that had been consuming them both. And as Adrian closed the door behind them, as his mouth found hers again, as his hands began to explore her body with reverent care, Amelia knew she'd made her choice. For better or worse, she was his. And he was hers. And nothing, not family drama or past mistakes or the weight of history, was going to change that now. The first time Adrian touched her, really touched her, Amelia understood why people wrote poetry about desire, why they composed symphonies and painted masterpieces and went mad trying to capture something that couldn't be captured. His hands moved over her body like he was memorizing her, like he was reading Braille and she was a story only he could understand. Every touch was reverent, questioning, waiting for permission that she gave freely, desperately, with sounds she'd never made before, and movements she didn't know her body was capable of. He undressed her slowly, his fingers trembling as they worked the buttons of her uniform. When she stood before him in nothing but the silver necklace he'd given her, he stepped back and just looked at her. The vulnerability of that moment, of being truly seen for the first time in her life, nearly brought her to her knees. "You're beautiful," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "God, Amelia, you're so beautiful it hurts to look at you." She reached for him, pulled him close and whispered against his mouth, "Then stop looking and touch me." What followed was a kind of baptism. He laid her on his bed, the same bed where he'd probably slept alone for years, and he worshipped her body with a patience and tenderness that made her cry. Not from pain, though there was some of that, but from the overwhelming sensation of being cherished. He took his time, teaching her body its own language, showing her pleasures she'd never imagined. And when he finally moved inside her, when they became one in the most ancient and intimate way, she felt something crack open in her chest. Something that had been locked away her entire life, waiting for this moment, this man, this terrible and beautiful surrender. Afterward, they lay tangled together, sweat-slicked and breathing hard, and Amelia felt fundamentally changed. Not because she'd lost her virginity, that seemed almost inconsequential now, but because she'd let someone see her completely. All her fears and desires and secrets laid bare, and he hadn't turned away. "I love you," Adrian said into the darkness. "I know I shouldn't. I know it's too soon and too complicated and probably doomed from the start. But I love you." Amelia turned to face him, traced the scar on his chest that she'd been too shy to ask about earlier. "I love you too. And I'm terrified." "Good. Fear means you're taking this seriously." He pulled her closer, tucked her head under his chin. "We're going to have to face the world tomorrow. Richard, Eleanor, all of it. Are you ready?" "No, but I'll do it anyway." They fell asleep like that, wrapped around each other, and for the first time since arriving at Lancaster Manor, Amelia slept without nightmares. She woke to sunlight streaming through unfamiliar windows and the sound of shouting from somewhere in the house. Adrian was already up, pulling on clothes with sharp, angry movements. "What's happening?" Amelia asked, sitting up and clutching the sheet to her chest. "Richard's back, and he's brought reinforcements." Adrian's face was grim. "Get dressed. This is going to get ugly." By the time Amelia made it downstairs, still wearing yesterday's uniform and feeling rumpled and obvious, the entrance hall had become a battlefield. Richard stood near the door with two other men in expensive suits, clearly lawyers. Mrs. Cavendish hovered near the stairs, her expression disapproving. And Adrian stood in the center of it all, arms crossed, looking like he was barely containing his rage. "There she is," Richard said when he saw Amelia. "The latest conquest. Tell me, Adrian, does she know what happened to the others? Does she know about Catherine and Margaret and all the rest?" "But get out of my house," Adrian said, his voice dangerously quiet. "Your house? This house belongs to the family trust. I have just as much right to be here as you do." Richard turned to Amelia and his smile was cruel. "Did he tell you he's done this before? Found a pretty young thing from the working class, seduced her, promised her the world. Did he tell you how it always ends?" "Richard, I'm warning you." "What?" You'll hit me. Go ahead. Give these lawyers more ammunition for the case we're building. Richard moved closer to Amelia, and she fought the urge to step back. He's using you, sweetheart. Just like he used Eleanor. Just like my father used your mother. It's what Lancaster men do. We take what we want and we destroy it. My mother? Amelia's voice came out steady despite the ice in her veins. Richard's grin widened. Oh, he didn't tell you? Your mother wasn't just a maid here. She was my father's mistress for 2 years. He got her pregnant, paid her off, and sent her away. She died because she was driving drunk, trying to escape the memories of what he'd done to her. And now you're here, repeating history with the next generation of Lancaster monsters. That's enough. Adrian moved between them, his hands clenched into fists. You don't know what you're talking about. Don't I? I found the old man's journals after he died. Read all about his conquests, his methods. He was very detailed about your mother, Amelia, about how young she was, how innocent, how much he enjoyed corrupting her. Amelia felt bile rise in her throat. She'd known there was a possibility her father was a Lancaster, but hearing it confirmed like this, hearing the casual cruelty with which it was delivered, made her want to vomit. Why are you doing this? She asked. What do you want? I want my brother to stop this farce before it destroys what's left of our family's reputation. Eleanor is already talking to journalists. If they find out about you, about the pattern, about any of it, we're finished. The business, the estate, everything our ancestors built will be gone. Then maybe it should be gone, Adrian said. Maybe we don't deserve to keep any of it. Richard laughed, sharp and bitter. There it is. The self-loathing that's driven you since father died. You think if you destroy everything, if you burn it all down, you'll somehow be redeemed. But you won't. You'll just be a Lancaster man who ruined the family legacy out of misplaced guilt. It's not misplaced. We've done terrible things. For generations, we've used our money and power to abuse women, to silence them, to erase them when they became inconvenient. I won't be part of that anymore. Noble words. But what about her? Richard pointed at Amelia. Have you told her what being with you will cost? The scrutiny, the scandal, the way society will chew her up and spit her out. Have you told her that she'll never be accepted in your world, that she'll always be seen as the help who got above herself? I don't care about his world, Amelia said, finding her voice. I don't care about society or reputation or any of it. You say that now. Wait until the press tears you apart. Wait until you can't go anywhere without being photographed, without people whispering about you. Wait until you realize that love isn't enough to overcome the class divide. Maybe it's not, Amelia agreed, but we're going to find out. She moved to stand beside Adrian, took his hand. It was a statement, a declaration, a line drawn in marble floor of Lancaster Manor. She was choosing him, choosing this. Consequences be damned. Richard's expression darkened. You're making a mistake. Both of you. And when this all falls apart, don't come crying to me. We won't, Adrian said. Now get out! Richard gestured to his lawyers and they left, but the threat hung in the air like smoke. This wasn't over. It was just beginning. After they'd gone, Adrian turned to Amelia, his face etched with worry. Are you okay? No, but I will be. She looked up at him. Is it true? About my mother? He nodded slowly. I think so. The timeline fits. Richard's right that our father kept journals. I found them years ago, but I couldn't bring myself to read them. If you want, we can go through them together. Learn the truth. I don't know if I want to know. Some truths are too painful. I understand, but the offer stands whenever you're ready. They spent the rest of that day in a kind of suspended animation, waiting for the next blow to fall. It came that evening in the form of a phone call. Eleanor was giving an interview to a major newspaper. She was telling everything. The control, the isolation, the systematic way the Lancaster family had preyed on vulnerable women for generations. And she was naming names. She's going to destroy us, Adrian said after hanging up. The business, the estate, my reputation, all of it. Do you want to stop her? He looked at her, and there was something like relief in his eyes. No, she deserves to tell her story. They all do. Every woman who was hurt by my family deserves to have their truth heard. Even if it costs you everything. Even then, he pulled her close. I'd rather lose everything and keep you than maintain this lie and lose my soul. Amelia felt something shift in her chest. This was who Adrian really was. Not the cold, controlled master of the manor, but a man trying desperately to break free from a legacy of cruelty. A man willing to sacrifice everything for what was right. Then we face it together, she said. The article came out 3 days later. It was devastating. Eleanor had provided documents, recordings, photographs. She'd traced the pattern of disappeared women back 5 generations. She'd interviewed former staff members who confirmed the abuse, the control, the systematic erasure of anyone who threatened the Lancaster reputation. And she'd named Adrian specifically as the latest in a long line of men who'd used their privilege to manipulate vulnerable women. The response was immediate and brutal. News crews camped outside the gates of Lancaster Manor. The family business lost major contracts. Adrian received death threats. And Amelia found herself at the center of a media firestorm she'd never wanted or imagined. Journalists dug into her background, found out about her mother, about the connection to the Lancaster family. They painted her as either a gold digger seducing a wealthy man or a victim too naive to see she was being manipulated. Neither portrayal was true, but truth didn't matter in the face of a good story. Through it all, Adrian stood by her. He gave interviews defending her, hired security to protect her from photographers, and refused to hide or deny their relationship. But Amelia could see the toll it was taking on him. The guilt, the shame, the weight of his family's sins crushing down on his shoulders. One night, about a week after the article broke, she found him in the music room again, playing that Chopin nocturne with a ferocity that bordered on violence. She sat beside him on the piano bench and put her hand on his arm, stopping him mid-phrase. "Talk to me," she said. "I've ruined your life." His voice was hollow. "Everything Richard said was right. You can't go anywhere without being harassed. You've lost any chance at a normal life. And for what? For me? I'm not worth this. Let me decide what you're worth. How can you even look at me, after everything you've learned about my family, about what we've done? Because you're not your family. You're trying to be different. You're facing the consequences instead of running from them." She took his face in her hands, forced him to look at her. "You're not your father, Adrian. You're not Richard. You're the man who's willing to lose everything, rather than perpetuate a cycle of abuse. That's who I see when I look at you. I don't deserve you. Probably not, but you're stuck with me anyway." He kissed her then, desperate and hungry, and she kissed him back with everything she had. They made love on the floor of the music room, surrounded by books and firelight and the ghost of Chopin's nocturne, and afterward, lying in his arms, Amelia felt something settle in her chest. A certainty, a knowledge that whatever came next, they would face it together. But the universe, it seemed, had one more test for them. 2 weeks after Eleanor's article, Richard made his move. He filed a lawsuit to have Adrian removed as trustee of the family estate, claiming diminished capacity and mismanagement. He brought evidence of Adrian's relationship with Amelia, argued that it showed poor judgment and an inability to maintain appropriate boundaries. He painted Adrian as unstable, obsessive, a danger to the family legacy. The hearing was scheduled for a grey Monday in November. Adrian and Amelia arrived at the courthouse in Manchester to find it surrounded by protesters, journalists, and curious onlookers. Some held signs supporting Eleanor and other victims. Others defended the Lancaster family's right to privacy. It was a circus, and they were the main attraction. Inside the courtroom, Richard sat with his lawyers, looking confident and cold. Eleanor was there too, on Adrian's side, ready to testify. When she and Amelia made eye contact, Eleanor nodded slightly. An acknowledgement. A passing of the torch, perhaps. The hearing was brutal. Richard's lawyers painted Adrian as a predator, used excerpts from Eleanor's interview to show a pattern of behavior. They brought up Amelia's age, her background, the power imbalance inherent in their relationship. They made it sound sordid, calculated, manipulative. When it was Adrian's turn to testify, he didn't shy away from the truth. He admitted his mistakes with Eleanor, acknowledged his family's history, and spoke openly about his relationship with Amelia. But he also pushed back against the narrative that he was continuing the pattern. "I love her," he said, looking directly at the judge. "Not because she's young or vulnerable or easy to control. So I love her because she's strong and brave, and she sees me clearly, all my flaws and damage, and she chooses to stay anyway. I love her because she's teaching me how to be better. And yes, there's a power imbalance. Yes, there are complications, but we're navigating them consciously. with open eyes, and we're building something that's nothing like what my family has done in the past. Then it was Amelia's turn. She'd been dreading this moment, terrified of public speaking, of being questioned by hostile lawyers. But when she took the stand and looked out at the courtroom, she felt something shift. She wasn't a victim. She wasn't a gold digger. She was a woman who'd made a choice, and she was going to own that choice. "Did Mr. Lancaster coerce you into a relationship?" Richard's lawyer asked. "No." "Did he use his position of power to manipulate you?" "No." "Then how do you explain the fact that you fell in love with a man 24 years older than you, a man who employed you, a man with a documented history of inappropriate relationships with staff?" Amelia took a breath. "I explain it by saying that love doesn't follow rules. It doesn't care about age gaps or employment relationships or what's appropriate. I fell in love with Adrian because he's kind and damaged and trying desperately to be better than his family legacy. I fell in love with him because when I'm with him, I feel seen in a way I never have before. And yes, there's risk. Yes, we might fail. But I'd rather take that risk than spend my life wondering what could have been." Even though his previous relationship with a staff member ended disastrously, Eleanor's relationship with Adrian ended because she was trapped by contracts and pressure from family members who wanted to silence her. Amelia looked directly at Richard. Because people like his brother valued reputation over human dignity, Adrian was complicit in that, and he owns that mistake. But he's different now. He's fighting against the same family members who tried to control Eleanor. He's on our side. The lawyer pressed further, trying to trip her up, to make her admit to being naive or manipulated, but Amelia held her ground. She spoke about her mother, about the research she'd done into the Lancaster family history, about going into this relationship with her eyes wide open. She admitted to being scared, to knowing it might not work, but she refused to be painted as a victim. When Eleanor testified, she surprised everyone. Instead of condemning Adrian, she spoke about the change she'd seen in him, about his attempts to free her from the restrictive contracts, about how he'd refused to enforce them even when Richard demanded it, about how he'd supported her decision to go public, even knowing it would destroy him. "Adrian Lancaster hurt me," Eleanor said, "but he's also the only Lancaster man I've ever known who was willing to admit his mistakes and try to change. That's worth something." The judge took a week to deliberate. 7 days of waiting, of uncertainty, of not knowing if Adrian would lose everything or if they'd be given a chance to build something new. They spent that week at Lancaster Manor, mostly in Adrian's private room, talking and making love and planning for futures both bright and dark. "If I lose the estate," Adrian said one night, "we'll have to leave. Start over somewhere else. I'm okay with that. You say that now, but I'm okay with that," she repeated firmly. "This house is beautiful, but it's also full of ghosts. Maybe we'd be better off somewhere else. Somewhere that's just ours." He pulled her close. "Have I told you lately that you're remarkable?" "Not in the last hour. Oversight on my part. When the judge's decision came, it wasn't what anyone expected. He ruled that Richard had failed to prove Adrian was unfit to manage the family trust. But he also ordered that independent oversight be established, that the estate be regularly audited, and that any future relationships with employees be subject to scrutiny. It was a compromise, a chance for Adrian to prove he could do better, but with guardrails in place. Richard was furious. He stormed out of the courthouse, making threats about appeals and further legal action. But Amelia could see the defeat in his eyes. He'd lost, not just the legal battle, but the war for control of the family legacy. Outside the courthouse, Adrian pulled Amelia aside. Away from the cameras and journalists and chaos. "I need to ask you something," he said. "What?" "Move in with me properly, not as staff, but as my partner. Help me transform Lancaster Manor into something different, something that honors the women who were hurt there instead of erasing them." Amelia thought about the house, about its history of pain and control, about the portraits in the gallery and the locked rooms and the secrets buried in every corner. It would be so easy to walk away, to start fresh somewhere without that weight. But she thought about what Eleanor had said, about the importance of facing history, of transforming spaces of trauma into spaces of healing, and she thought about Adrian, about the man he was trying to become. "Yes," she said, "but on one condition. Anything. We open the West Wing to the public. We turn it into a museum, a memorial to all the women who suffered at the hands of your family. We tell their stories properly. We make sure they're remembered." Adrian's eyes filled with tears. "That's perfect. That's absolutely perfect." They kissed there on the courthouse steps, cameras flashing around them, creating the image that would appear on front pages the next day. The Lancaster heir and his working-class girlfriend, defying society's expectations, choosing love over reputation. It wasn't a fairy tale ending. It was messier than that, more complicated. But it was real. The months that followed were hard. Adrian worked with Eleanor to release her from the restrictive contracts, giving her full freedom to tell her story without legal repercussions. Together, they established a foundation to support women escaping abusive relationships, funded by the Lancaster family fortune. Richard fought them at every turn, but his power was diminishing. The business partners who'd supported him quietly withdrew their backing. The family members who'd turned a blind eye to abuse for generations found themselves on the wrong side of history. Amelia moved into the West Wing with Adrian, into rooms they renovated together, stripping away the oppressive burgundy paint and replacing it with light colors that made the space feel open and alive. They catalogued everything they found. Every document, every photograph, every piece of evidence about the women who'd lived and worked and suffered in Lancaster Manor, and they began the work of creating the memorial. The project took over a year. They hired historians, researchers, designers. They tracked down descendants of the women in the portraits, invited them to contribute stories and memories. They found Catherine's great-niece, who provided letters that revealed a woman full of life and dreams, not just a tragic death. They found Margaret's grandson, who shared photographs of a vibrant, beautiful woman who'd loved to paint. Each woman became real, became more than just a cautionary tale or a portrait on a wall. They became people with hopes and fears and complicated lives, and Lancaster Manor became a testament to them, a place that acknowledged the harm done and committed to doing better. Sarah stayed on as staff, promoted to curator of the memorial. Mrs. Cavendish retired, but not before admitting to Amelia that she'd been trying to protect her in her own harsh way. Thomas tended the gardens and taught Amelia about the plants, about how to coax beauty from difficult soil. And Adrian and Amelia learned how to love each other in the real world, not just in the heightened drama of a scandal. They fought sometimes, usually about his tendency to be overprotective or her stubborn independence. But they also laughed and talked and built something that felt sturdy, something that could weather storms. On a grey afternoon in October, exactly 2 years after Amelia had first arrived at Lancaster Manor, they stood in the newly opened memorial wing. Visitors wandered through the exhibits, reading the stories, looking at the photographs, learning about the women who'd been erased. "Your mother's here," Adrian said quietly, guiding Amelia to a small alcove. There was a photograph she'd never seen before. Maria Rivers, 23 years old, standing in the Lancaster Manor gardens. She was laughing at something off camera, her face full of life and joy. Beneath the photo was a plaque with her story. Not the sanitized version, but the truth, about the older man who'd taken advantage of her, about the baby she'd had alone, about the car accident that had ended her life too soon. "We found her sister," Adrian said. "Your aunt. She's still alive, living in Edinburgh. She wants to meet you." Amelia stared at the photo, at this woman who'd given her life but whom she'd never known. "Does she hate me? For being a Lancaster?" "No, she hates my father. But she wants to know you. She has stories about your mother, photographs, letters. She wants to share them with you." Amelia nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. All these years she'd thought she was alone in the world, and now she had Adrian, and an aunt, and a history that was painful but at least was finally true. That evening, after the memorial had closed and the visitors had gone home, Amelia and Adrian stood in the entrance hall where she'd first arrived. The space felt different now. Lighter somehow, despite the same marble floor and high ceilings. "Do you regret it?" Adrian asked. "Staying? Choosing this life?" Amelia thought about everything they'd been through. The scandal, the legal battles, the constant scrutiny. She thought about the work of transforming Lancaster Manor, the emotional toll of confronting such dark history. She thought about the fight she and Adrian had, about his still occasional tendency to be controlling, about her own struggles with feeling like she belonged in his world. "No," she said honestly. "It's been hard, but it's also been real, and I'd rather have hard and real than easy and fake." "I love you," he said. "I know I tell you that constantly, but I need you to hear it again. I love you for staying. I love you for pushing me to be better. I love you for seeing the potential in this place and helping me transform it. I love you too, even when you're being an overprotective aristocrat who thinks he knows what's best for me." He laughed. "I'm working on that. I know. And I appreciate it." They stood there in comfortable silence, and Amelia thought about how far they'd come. From that first charged moment in the library to this quiet evening in a house that was slowly healing, it wasn't a perfect transformation. There were still ghosts here, still rooms that felt heavy with history. But there was also light now. There was hope. Eleanor came to visit sometimes, bringing her new partner, a woman she'd met in Cornwall. The four of them would have dinner in the small dining room, and they'd talk about the memorial, about the foundation, about the ongoing work of accountability. It was strange and sometimes painful, but it was also healing. Eleanor and Adrian had made their peace, finding a way to acknowledge the past without being destroyed by it. Richard rarely visited anymore. He'd sold his share of the family business and moved to London, where he continued to rail against what he saw as the destruction of the Lancaster legacy. But his protests grew quieter over time, drowned out by the voices of the women who were finally being heard. 6 months after the memorial opened, Adrian proposed, not with an expensive ring or a dramatic gesture, but with a simple question asked on a Tuesday morning over breakfast. "Marry me," he said, "not because I want to possess you or control you or any of the terrible things my ancestors did. Marry me because I want to build a life with you, because I want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep beside you every night, because you make me better and I hope I make you better too." Amelia looked at him across the table, at this man who'd been so damaged when she'd met him and who was still learning how to love in a healthy way. She thought about how easy it would be to say no, to maintain some distance, to protect herself from the vulnerability that came with total commitment. But she also thought about everything they'd survived together. Every battle fought, every demon faced, every moment of choosing each other over the easier path. "Yes," she said, "but I'm keeping my name." He smiled and it transformed his face. "I wouldn't expect anything less." They married in the spring, in a small ceremony in the memorial wing, surrounded by the portraits and stories of the women who'd come before. It felt right, like they were making a promise not just to each other but to history, a promise to do better, to love better, to build something that honored those who'd been hurt rather than repeating their pain. Eleanor was there, and Sarah and Thomas. Amelia's aunt came from Edinburgh, bringing photographs and stories that made Amelia cry. Even Mrs. Cavendish attended, her perpetual scowl softening just slightly when she saw how happy they were. As Amelia walked down the makeshift aisle toward Adrian, past the portrait of her mother, past all the faces of women who'd loved and lost in this house, she felt their presence like a blessing. They'd walked this path before her, had paid the price for loving Lancaster men. But she was writing a different ending. She and Adrian both were. When the officiant asked if she took this man to be her husband, she didn't hesitate. "I do." And when Adrian slipped the ring onto her finger, his hands were steady and sure. They honeymooned not in some exotic location, but in the gardens of Lancaster Manor, spending lazy days reading in the sunshine and long nights mapping each other's bodies like explorers, discovering new territory. It wasn't grand or glamorous, but it was theirs. Amelia took over as director of the memorial, using her natural empathy and her understanding of what it meant to be overlooked, to create exhibits that truly honored the women they memorialized. Adrian continued working on the foundation, using his family's money to fund programs that supported survivors of abuse. Together, they slowly transformed the Lancaster legacy from one of harm to one of healing. It wasn't perfect. There were still hard days when Adrian would slip into old patterns of control, and Amelia would have to remind him she wasn't someone who could be managed. There were still moments when the weight of history felt too heavy, when the ghosts of Lancaster Manor seemed to press too close. But they faced those moments together, with honesty and humor and a commitment to keep choosing each other. Years later, Standing in that same entrance hall where she'd first arrived, Amelia would think about that frightened 22-year-old girl with a worn suitcase and desperate questions about her mother. She would think about how impossible it had seemed that love could bloom in such dark soil, and she would marvel at what they'd built. Lancaster Manor was no longer a house of secrets. It was a home, and more than that, it was a testament to the possibility of change. Proof that even the most toxic legacies could be transformed. That love, real love, the messy and complicated and hard-fought kind, could heal wounds that had festered for generations. On quiet evenings, Adrian would still play Chopin in the music room, and Amelia would sit and listen, marveling at how the same notes could sound so different now. What had once been mournful now sounded hopeful. What had once been lonely now felt like coming home. "Do you ever wonder," she asked him one night, "what would have happened if I'd never come here? If I'd stayed in that village and lived a safe, small life?" "Every day," he admitted. "And I'm grateful every day that you didn't. Even though I make your life more complicated. Especially because of that." She laughed and moved to sit beside him on the piano bench. He played a few more bars, then stopped and turned to her. "I was thinking," he said, "about what comes next. For us, what do you mean? The memorial is established. The foundation is running smoothly. Maybe it's time we think about the future. About what we want to build that's entirely ours, not about fixing the past. What did you have in mind?" He took her hand, brought it to his lips. "I was thinking about the nursery. The one on the 3rd floor that's been locked since my childhood. What if we opened it? What if we filled it with light and laughter, and the sound of small feet?" Amelia's breath caught. They talked about children in abstract terms, but never seriously. Never as something that might actually happen. "Are you sure?" "With everything that's happened, with the history, I'm sure," he said firmly. "Because I believe we can break the pattern completely. We can raise children who understand their history, but aren't defined by it. Who know about power and privilege and responsibility. Who learn from the mistakes of previous generations instead of repeating them." Amelia thought about it. About bringing new life into Lancaster Manor. About the weight of that responsibility and the possibility of it. About creating something beautiful from soil that had been poisoned for so long. "Yes," she said finally. "Let's do it. Let's fill this house with love and chaos and the future." He kissed her then, soft and sweet and full of promise. And in that moment, with the piano silent and the house settling around them, and their future stretching bright before them, Amelia knew they'd made it. They'd taken something broken and made it whole. They'd taken a love that should have been toxic and made it transformative. They'd survived Lancaster Manor, and more than that, they'd changed it. The house still stood on its hill, grey stone and leaded windows and gargoyles watching the world below. But inside where it mattered, everything was different. The halls that had once echoed with secrets now rang with laughter. The rooms that had trapped women now offered them tribute. The legacy that had been built on silence now spoke truth. And in the heart of it all were Amelia and Adrian, two people from opposite worlds who'd found each other in the darkness and chosen to walk toward the light together. Not because it was easy, not because it made sense, but because love, real love, was worth fighting for, worth transforming for, worth everything. Some houses are built with stone and timber. Others are built with silence and secrets. But the best houses, the ones that endure, are built with truth and forgiveness and the brave, messy work of choosing love every single day. Lancaster Manor had become one of those houses. And Amelia Rivers, now Amelia Rivers Lancaster by her own choice, had helped build it that way. It wasn't a fairy tale ending. But it was something better. It was real, and it was enough.